Yo, people, Wagwan, this is the Millennial View. I am your host, Spirit Ravers. Welcome, my new subscribers, originators. Welcome back. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, drop a comment below because it is important to have that discussion with your friends. This morning, people, well, it's the afternoon here, but over there, it's in the morning. But
yeah.
yes, we have a very, very, very special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Farron Dozier to the show.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, bro. How you doing, man?
I'm great, man. Great to be here. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of your show, man.
It's definitely a pleasure to have you on board here, sir. Now, when I first went on your IG, right?
Okay.
I noticed that you have your own radio show, the Farron Dozier Show.
Yeah.
And I want to say congratulations on that. And I saw NBC is that's what intrigued me because I said I'm like, yo, this dude is like big. Like, so my first question is, how did you get started with the radio show journey?
Man, as we talk about my story, podcasting started for me almost 11 years ago. I did an interview on a blog talk show, and it was in the midst of my depression.
Okay.
And so a friend of mine told me, like, why don't you do a sports show or something? Because I had lost, during my depression, I had lost interest in a lot of things in life. And one of them was sports. I was a huge sports fan. I mean, at the bar, every sporting event, drinking, having food, and just socializing. And then as I transitioned out of the service, that depression and anxiety kicked in, and I just lost interest. So a friend of mine said, do a podcast, maybe that'll help you stay connected or something. And so I went on, I remember doing an interview on Blog Talk in 2009. And so 2010, I went on Blog Talk and created a sports show, man. And ever since then, it's shifted from sports to my sickle cell trait awareness. And then I became this advocate for humanity because I saw that it doesn't matter what you're dealing with. We all have our versions of these experiences in life, and they're relatable. And so I use my platform, man, to just reach people, share my testimony, let them come and share their story, whatever they care about, because we want to be heard. And that's how I got started. And it just evolved from doing this on my laptop and a phone line, drinking vodka and cranberry because I was so nervous.
Yeah.
To going to LA Talk Live in 2012. I went to do a show there, an interview, and I walked in and this place had these red walls and a brick wall. And I'm like, this place is beautiful. And I'm like, after I got done my interview, I'm like, hey, how can I have a show here? And so that was like August. By February, I had reached out to the owner of the station, the internet podcasting station, and I launched my first show on his network in March of 2013. And they had cameras. It was on iTunes, like it was all over, like globally on the internet platform. And so I just grew my shows there. All the ideas that I had about podcasting, from the sports to the military show called Trench Talk, to chasing hoop dreams for athletes, like all these different ideas, I just birthed them all at that station, man. And it just grew from there until now. You see, I decided, and it took me about 3 years to go to KCAA radio.
Okay.
It's not cheap. Because it is 2 FM stations and an AM station, plus all the streaming platforms from iHeart to iTunes to TuneIn Radio. So it's nationally on all the streaming platforms, Spotify, YouTube. So I was like, it's time. Like, it's my passion. And so when my dad passed away in 2019, and we'll get into that subject, another level of depression settled in. And I wanted to give up because I lost my dad. And so it was like I was in this kind of dark space. I was still trying to do my radio show, but I had a little attitude, and I was just suffering. And then just a few weeks ago, I was like, you know what? I got a glimpse of the light, and said, I'm going back. I said, if I got to pay for it out of my own pocket to get it off the ground, and then maybe I'll find some sponsors or whatever that'll support it. So I called back to the station, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for a slot. He said, okay, what you want, an hour? I'm like, yeah, give me an hour once a week. And so he had a 6 o'clock spot. And so I inherit NBC Sports, NBC. It's all inherited with the platform, man.
Mm. You know, very, very interesting that you mentioned that you were depressed and you found this way to pick yourself back up, because depression can be one of the hardest things people even deal with.
Yes.
I actually work in a special ed high school, and I see these kids, they are very emotionally disturbed. So they need that figure to push them and help them keep going. Because at
Exactly.
first, when I first worked there, I was kind of like nervous because I was used to working with general education students. You know, so I'm like, oh, this is about to be a new environment for me. I was nervous, you know, because of, you know, experiences that I've heard from other people that stepped into that field.
Yeah.
But my first year, it was actually pretty good. This year is a little more difficult because we're in the pandemic.
Of course.
But I definitely understand, like, you know, mental health is a real thing.
Yeah. And
It's
I
definitely.
and I applaud you, man, because what people don't understand, and like I said, this is going to be one of those kind of conversations, and I'm relating to you because when you say special ed and you're talking about the youth, and we're talking about these empirical truths about our connection to people, and exclusion exclusion is a real conversation, and to understand exclusion and how it affects the brain and emotions, those children, if they hear that term special ed, and it feels like it separates them from the rest of the school, that's enough to try to deal with what's wrong with me. Because exclusion, it silent traumas happen on the limbic system of the brain where emotions and short-term memory is. And that's scientific, that's study. So just being labeled, how we label people, it impacts us even in other parts of our life. So for you to be an instructor and a teacher, I always took my hat off to teachers because they're underrated.
Absolutely.
They're underrated. And we know that. Even you heard Shaq say teachers should be paid the most money of all the freaking, professions, because they deal with these children who have gone through so many different environments and have so many different backgrounds, and I don't like the word issues, but these things in life that they're challenged by, and they come to your class and you got to sort through it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So now I want to transition to father to children relationships. So you
Okay.
mentioned that your father passed away in 2019, and my condolences for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you say that your father was a big inspiration in your life?
Today, yes. Years ago, no.
Okay.
So, yes, today, looking back on my dad and having a level of compassion and relatedness and even understanding about how he grew up in his environment and his dad's environment and his dad's environment, man, it shifted how I looked at my dad and how I saw that this dude did the best he could with what he knew how, with what he had. And so as a child, we don't understand that. But as an adult, and when he passed away, I'm like, this dude's spiritual walk, like, he went to church, he prayed, he was connected to the Holy Spirit, but he still dealt with his life issues every day. And what I learned from that was he taught me how to live a sinless life. And it's sinless. We're going to sin regardless. But if you sin less, you are connected to what your spiritual beliefs are, and you make those corrections every day as your journey goes on. So if you do something to somebody, or you make somebody mad, or something happens, you can take responsibility. You can ask, hey, forgive me for that. You know what? I didn't mean to come across that way. Sometimes I'm a jerk. So let me clear this up. That's what my dad showed me when I look back in his life on who he was. And for that, man, I'm grateful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I would also say that my dad, he's my biggest inspiration in life. Like he's told me all the life lessons. He never actually met his father. So,
Mhm.
I'm like more than thankful each day that I have him in my life to, keep me going in my life.
Yeah.
Now, this is gonna be a different
Go
jump
ahead.
here. You have, some father figures that are generalized as, fathers that don't really do their part. Do
Yes.
you think it's the fact that they're not ready? Do you feel like they're intimidated? Like, what's your reaction to that?
Oh my gosh. That again, this read that I created based off of me and my dad's relationship,
Mm,
I have to come from a spiritual conversation with that, right? And I'll
mm-hmm,
do both. I'll do both. The spiritual aspect that I learned recently is that yes, some men who have grown up, like you said, didn't have their father, so they have no idea of what it takes to be a father. And if it is, it's from some idol, some basketball idol, or whatever that figure is that they try to portray or implement. But even then, you can be raised by your grandfather, a stepfather, but it's not your biological father. And the spirit will always want to figure out, where is my dad and what's going on or what happened between me and my dad. So for me, I got 3 daughters.
okay.
I could tell you that the story about maturing, men mature at a later age, I could tell you, 40 years old. It took
Mm,
me till I was 40 years old to realize what kind of life that I was living, and that I did have stepfathers to nurture me and source me, but
mm-hmm,
I still had this thing about my dad that he got on my nerve.
mm,
And I think that's where the corrupted views of fathers come into play, because we all have this perception of our father. And if you're looking at a man based off of how your father was, then you're not allowing that man to just be himself. You can't go to Taco Bell and get a Big Mac. And so we ask men for things sometimes that they don't even know how to even produce, to even express it.
mm-hmm,
So there's a level of education and a level of knowledge and understanding that has to be had to move all that stuff out the way and
right.
just allow that man to figure out what it is to be a man and to be a father, because the father is a totally different role than being a man. And I think that society has collapsed all those labels. And so if you're a father, then they expect you to look like this. If you and so these are roles that you're supposed to do. But if you never seen that role take place before, how can you produce that? Especially the way that this person is tell you supposed to look like, because maybe her views is corrupted too. So
Mm-hmm,
then nobody's speaking the same language.
right. and
So it's
and in this generation you actually have some men that feel pressured to
oh
express their emotions. Like they feel like, oh, I'm gonna look so soft if I you know tell my girlfriend this, tell my wife that. Like they look at it as, oh, I'm not gonna do that because it's the soft thing to do. But it's like transparency is key. You know what
see
I'm saying?
that word I've been hearing that word a
Mm-hmm.
lot is transparency. But what
Mm-hmm.
does that mean? What it means to you and to that girl or to other men, it might mean something different. So
Right.
when you're saying transparency, you're saying you're describing something that you're expecting to see people express. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, again, I'm about to be 51. I grew up with my grandparents from age 2 to age 8.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little bit of both. I have where the woman stays home and takes care of the kids, because I've seen that with my grandparents, because that's how their relationship was,
Mm-hmm.
right? That old school, the male had a role, the woman had a role, and everybody played their role. And my grandfather didn't talk. He pulled up from work, and when you heard that truck hit the street, that muffler,
Mm-hmm.
we scattered like roaches, so that house could be peace and quiet when he came home. They didn't talk. He didn't have to talk. But now in our age, you've got to be in touch with your emotions. You've got to be able to articulate that. You got to be able to say, not describe what's happening, but you got to be able to find the word, the best word that fits what you're trying to say, so that you can say that word and not say, I'm just being transparent. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Because the two things for human beings are hard for. The first hardest thing of being a human is honoring our word, integrity. That's the hardest thing, especially honoring our word to ourselves. And I'm sure you could look in your life where you told, I'm gonna do this and do this, and then we don't do it. And then, but what that does to us, it diminishes our experience of ourselves. It reduces, like, I don't even keep my word to myself. But then we be like, well, I'm 98% integrity, so I'm not gonna worry about the 2%. But it's the 2% that's gonna keep showing up that you're not in your word. So that's one of the hardest. The second hardest thing for people or humanity is keeping an empowering context through our circumstances. And to me, that's what faith is. Faith is being able to see, to believe that it's going to work out regardless of what it looks like today. And keeping an empowering context means how we talk about our circumstances and our situations. And the brain is created to survive life. So it's always going to look for the lack in your life, always. No matter how great you produce an event or you produce a conversation or you get an accolade, your brain's going to go, oh, but you didn't do this. Oh, but you didn't do that. And that's not a negative, but it's how the brain works. It's always trying to make sure you survive life. And I think these are the kind of conversations that we have to have that are hard. They're challenging because you have to be able to discover it for yourself. Like I can't tell you what it is. You have to look in your own life and be honest with, you know what? That's because I saw you smile when you said when I said about keeping your honor on your word to yourself. You're like, oh, I know where I've done that before.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of talks that I want to have, because when you could look at it from that perspective, you're not by yourself. Everybody's dealing with something like that in their own version. And we're trying to survive life and have a family and find love and be friends. And all that stuff is going on in your head.
Right.
How does that really look?
Right. Yeah, people, listen. It doesn't cost you anything to express your emotions. You hear that?
Yeah.
You understand? Now, sickle cell awareness. Yes. How was that brought to you?
Man, so 2006, I was about my 17th year in the military, and I went to go to my NCOES course to get promoted to E8. So I was at E7. Once I got done with this course, I make the E8 list to get promoted to my master sergeant rank. So I got up that morning like normal, push-ups, sit-ups, out doing the 2-mile run. And I heard the last lap, I was at like, 15:45, 15:46. I heard the instructor with the time. So I'm like, cool, I'm actually doing pretty good. So we're trained to sprint the last lap. So when I heard the time, I'm like, okay, this is my last lap. There's the finish line. Let me kick in that gear to get my best time. So I did that. And as I came across the finish line, 16 minutes, my peripheral started getting dark. And I'm like, man, I don't feel well. And I'm catching my breath, I'm breathing. And all of a sudden it just got dark. So I kneeled down, closed my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, everything was spinning like a million miles an hour. So the medics came and got me, rushed me to the hospital. Doctor came in, gave me an IV, came back in a few minutes later, says, you ever had kidney problems? I says, no. He says, what do you do now? And he walks out. And I'm like, what the heck? So he comes back in and says, you know what? Freak accident. You're probably just dehydrated, heat stroke, heat exhaustion. I'm going to give you another IV. Go back to the barracks, take the day off, and you should be fine. I do that. I wake up in the afternoon and I'm worse. I'm throwing up. I almost crapped on myself. Like I'm in a terrible state. I go back to sleep. I know it's after 4:30 because my classmates come in the barracks and they see me in the bunk, and I'm like, I got to go back to the hospital. So they rush me back to the doctor. The night doctor does some more blood work, and he sees my creatinine kinase levels, CK levels, and they're like 12,000. And so for my age at 36, they were supposed to be like about 150. So that what he saw in my blood work is a condition called rhabdomyolysis, which is a skeletal muscular disorder. And what happens is when the muscles break down into the bloodstream, it releases negative toxins, even negative potassium. So what happens is once it hits the kidneys, all those toxins start to cause the kidneys to fail. So I was having renal failure in the morning, but it got worse that night. They were at like 50% each when the night doctor caught it. So again, not connected to sickle cell trait. He flushes my kidneys for like 4 days. Now I could barely walk. My body is overheated, so I have double vision. I have vertigo. Like I have these health issues. I'm on the base because now that's 06. 2010, I'm on the base and I'm in mental health classes now because I'm depressed because my military career is coming to an end. They told me that I'm going to be getting a medical retirement, medical discharge.
Okay.
I made it mean my life is over. So I started finding all the evidence, how I told you about that subconscious mind. So my marriage failed. I lost all this stuff. Nobody wants to talk to me because my life is over. So I became mentally challenged. I'm on the base and I'm leaving my appointment. And the officer that I served with during the war in 0405, I was a platoon sergeant. He was a platoon leader. We spent a year together and I know him. Past me, says, how you been? I'm like, you don't want to know. He's like, tell me. I'm like, man, my muscles, I could barely walk. I'm in these mental health classes now. He says, you know what? Something like that happened to me where my muscles locked up, but I have sickle cell trait. So I have to drink extra water, take these vitamins. And I'm like, hey, why does that sound familiar? And I remembered in 1999 on my second physical in the military at the LA Air Force Base, they found my sickle cell trait. And they called me like, hey, you need to come back to the clinic. I'm like, all right, cool. So I'm like, do I have a STD or something? Like, what y'all find in my blood work? They're like, do you know you have sickle cell trait? I'm like, no. He says, okay, well, we just want to let you know. I'm like, okay, cool. I say, hold on. I have a cousin with sickle cell disease. It's not sickle cell disease. Like, no, you're just a trait carrier. You should have no problems. This is 99. No problems, no complicate, just make sure you don't have a mate with another person. I'm like, well, I'm done having kids, so that ain't gonna happen. So I don't do my own research either. They gave me no pamphlet, no brochure, nothing. So I'm 29, I'm moving to Michigan, packed up my place. I'm gone about my career, never thinking of it again until 2010. So from 99 until 2010, when my buddy mentions that to me, I go get my physical from that 99 date. And sure enough, positive sickle cell trait. I go home, I do my research, and I find that military, athletes, people hanging out in Denver, Colorado have collapsed and died from the same thing that I experienced called sickle cell trait exertion. And then that opened up to learning more about my inherited gene and then realizing that there's a whole conversation. So a mental health provider that I was seeing says, hey, what are you going to do when you retire? I said, well, I got an idea about a sports brand. Maybe I'll sell some hats and t-shirts and sit on the dock of the bay and watch the tires roll away. That was my retirement song. And so he's like, let me show you something. And so he opened up this book that he written for college, high school to college athletes and like how to prepare, what to look for. And he had 2 paragraphs on sickle cell trait exertion with rhabdo in his book. And I'm reading it crying like, you know what happened to me? He's like, oh yeah, it happens a lot. And sometimes it gets misdiagnosed and people die from it. He says, so you could become an advocate. I'm like, what's an advocate? He's like, you can actually use your sports brand, sell your hats and t-shirts and travel and educate people about what happened to you and tell your story. I was like, what? And so I went home that night, and instead of being awake at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, wanting to jump out the window or commit suicide, I started doing research on that gene. And I put together this whole platform. And I realized that God had allowed me to experience that because I could speak to it. And now I have a foundation of 501 where I go out to colleges, military bases, churches, health fairs, and share about sickle cell trait and the risk factors, because most people don't know. And athletes have died. They're still dying today. Military people are still dying today because they don't know the risk factors of exerting yourself with that inherited gene, and it can cause sudden death. And so I get to do that now as my, I call that's my gift. So I learned from God that's my gift because it's a seed that I can plant in any conversation I'm having. Like I don't have to force that. And people who are interested will talk to me about that. And if they're not, then I'm okay. So I learned that is my gift. But in certain conversations, I do have to focus on that because these are people's lives.
Right.
300 million people globally have sickle cell trait. African Americans, we are number one because of where our ancestors are from.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have ancestors that are from Africa or near the equator, it could be in your bloodline because that's how those races survive malaria. So it combats malaria in those parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, in the United States, we talk about the severity of the health complications and the sudden death, which they do have there, but they're focused on mosquito nets because they don't want to get malaria. We focus on, making sure we don't mate with another person, and then also now the message of the risk factors and the health issues. And they really just never studied sickle cell trait. They focus on sickle cell disease, which of course because of the babies, but they never really focused on the people who carry this gene to tell them about their health complications that are possible.
Yeah. See, I've never like met anyone personally that had sickle cell trait or disease.
Mm-hmm.
I've may have heard like one person having it, but I just never really got in depth to like what the disease really is or what can it do. So you definitely educated me on how it works.
Yeah, it's a red blood cell. It's the red blood cells carry oxygen, and
Mm-hmm.
so with a person with sickle cell disease, when that oxygen is depleted in the crisis, it becomes hard and sticky and like a sickle shape, and so mucus and that is left in the cells, so it sticks in the veins, blood vessels. So wherever that crisis happens, there's no more oxygen getting to that part of the body because that cell has depleted its oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever that sickle happens, it could be in your brain, eyes, lungs, organs, wherever blood flows, they can have a crisis. At any given time, could be 50-60% of their red blood cells are in a crisis. And so and there's no cure for it. So with
That's about to be my
me,
next question.
yeah. So with me, I have one normal red blood cell
Mm-hmm.
and I have one that mutates. And so that perfect morning, the ones that mutated, I lost 40% oxygen to my body, which triggered the secondary health issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's that real deep.
Yeah. That's not a light conversation.
It's not. Have you ever thought about like writing a book or publishing a book based on, what you've been through?
So I do. And I guess for me initially there was of course there's a fear of I write a book like but there was this little light in the back of my mind like I wouldn't mind sharing my story in a book, and then because of all these I got 10 years of podcasting, man. I got so many episodes right now. Like I don't even have to do another show. I could just go back and just edit episodes and put them up and just, and talk from there. But I had this idea of writing the chronicles, right? And that was how I envisioned it. Like take each phase of my life and write a chronicle, a book about it, and then just keep going through my whole journey. I was doing a career day at an elementary school in my city, and the counselor, this is the second year, another guy came in, and so she was like, "You two need to meet." And he's a male nurse, and so we started talking, and she had kind of gave him a little background about me. So he's like, "I heard she said you have a radio show and all these things like that, right?" So we're talking, and he's like, "Yeah, I just wrote an inspirational read." I'm like, "What's an inspirational read?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I was in this real bad car accident. Me and my friends were up in like Mulholland Drive somewhere, and they were going around a curve, and the car in front of them went. It was a sharp turn, and the car in front of them made the turn, but they went off the cliff, and so they survived that car crash." So he says, man, God must have allowed me to experience that. And I'm sharing my story about how I survived because I think I have a purpose. So he's like, yeah, I wrote this 16-page inspirational read, and I'm going to share that and maybe sell it. But I want people to like hear my story so they can, learn about themselves. Like, and I'm standing there like, so you could write a book that's like 16 pages. He's like, yeah, it's like, they're called inspirational reads, and I'm like, and right there, he gave me the idea. And so what I did was, the ideas that I had about learning about my decisions that I made about my parents, learning the decision that I made about my peers at 14, learning the decision I made about my children at 23. I made my own inspirational read. And so I call it Life of. So I have a series that I'm going to put together called, this one is Life of a 5-year-old. And that's about my dad and how I healed with my dad after 35 years. And so Life of an 8-year-old is healing with my mom, with that one of those decisions that I discovered of why my abandonment issues came from, why I cheated, why I didn't trust women, all came from a decision of an 8-year-old about my mother, thinking that I was abandoned by my mother. And if I told you that story, you would call the social workers on my mama. You'd be like, she going to jail, right? Yeah. And so Life of a 14-year-old is that first girlfriend. And I don't even know how she became my girlfriend. I was 9th grade and I played basketball all day long. And somehow she was my girlfriend. And the next thing I know, she's dating my friend. Yeah. And I'm like, what? So in that decision, I made a decision. I'm not going to be vulnerable. And it just reinforced the decision I made about my mother. So it just took me away from communicating with women, and then how I had to survive relationships.
Got you.
And I became a liar and a cheater, but I didn't realize what that was because I was protecting that little 8-year-old, that little 14-year-old kid, but not knowing my behavior was what that was. And we labeled it as cheating or players, but do we really talk about what's the spirit behind that? Why does that person do it? What's the spirit of why they do that? Because they're hurting and they don't even know that they're hurting, but it gets expressed in these kind of fashions. So that's the life of a 14-year-old. The life of a 23-year-old is when I had my first 2 daughters, and I heard these 2 girls in the corner. Me and my buddy was having dinner at a restaurant, and these girls was like going in. Girl, I wouldn't date no guy with no kids. Oh, heck no, I wouldn't. And I'm sitting there eating like, and I'm not listening to my buddy. I'm listening to the conversation way over here. And I'm like, I got 2 daughters, 8 months apart. And I'm like, I'm not going to be accepted. Like, it's reinforcing that issue with women. And so I'm like, how am I going to survive? Like, how am I going to do? And so that subconscious mind is not our friend. It will figure out a way to survive situations. And so I told myself, I know what I'll do. I'm just not going to tell women I have kids. And so, because I justified it like, well, if those are my daughters, so if you meet me and you like me, then you should like me for me, not because of if I have kids or not. But that, in my mind, it made sense, but that's not how life works. So when sometimes I would meet women, they're like, oh, you have any kids? No. Because she was fine, or I wanted to meet her, like I wanted to engage. Yeah. So I would be like, no. But when I was feeling myself, I'd be like, oh yeah, I got 2 daughters. And I would be cool. If I was kind of skeptical, I'd be like, I have 1, and I hold my breath to see the response. So I would be like, no kids, 1 kid, or if I was confident that day and courageous in who I was that day, oh yeah, I have 2 daughters, and I wouldn't care if you like me or not. Right. But that's the mix up of making these decisions at young ages when we don't even really know what's going on. And so I am writing my books, but they're going to be these inspirational reads. This one is only like 10 pages. And so the purpose of this is to demonstrate with fathers and sons, men, to reflect on your relationship with your dad And I love my dad. Like, and everybody's gonna tell you, I love my dad. I love him, but he got on my nerve.
Mm-hmm.
There was a strain. There was something in the way. There was a wedge that kept me from actually connecting to him purely, right? Because, and you hear it, like I said, my dad got on my nerve. People say my dad's crazy. Whatever that is, we have a description of our parents. And when I learned what my description was and why I got to that point, it was like, well, that was a 5-year-old kid that said his dad didn't love him. A 5-year-old does not know what it is to be an adult. The perception of a child has no, but the brain is developing, right? And it's giving meaning to things that happen to us, even as a child, because we're trying to make sense of stuff. And if the parent doesn't know that that happens and to correct it when it happens, oh, he's shy. Well, how did he go from being this lively child to bouncing off the walls to now he's shy? Well, because he tried to talk to you and you told him to go sit down. I ain't got time. Go to your room.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of sitting with listening and say, hey, answering the child. Why? Because that brain is developing. And if you don't tell the truth to that child, he's going to go to his room, going to close the door, and he's going to make up his own story about what happened. And now that becomes the truth about what happens. And that's how our perception, interpretation, perspective gets corrupted. Not right or wrong, but corrupted because sometimes as parents, we don't know that we need to communicate the truth to that child. That's why they say divorce is so impactful on the children, because sometimes the child makes it mean like, what did I do wrong? How can I fix this? But it has nothing to do with the child. It's the parents that are dealing with it. So the child doesn't know at such a young, even as an 8, 12-year-old, you don't really understand divorce. You just know you got to pick what parent to go stay with.
Right.
But the script that we make up about the divorce is where the issues of our life could start to happen, because I don't know if my parents got divorced. My parents weren't married.
Mm-hmm.
So it was again, the perception. So that's what it's called, the perception of my father, the life of a 5-year-old. And I get into the before, during, and after on how I healed with my dad at age 40. So for 35 years, I treated my dad terribly. I couldn't stand him for more than 2 hours until I realized it was who I was being, not my dad. And all my dad ever wanted, when I discovered what that wedge was, and I acknowledged it and I talked to him, all my dad said was, I just want to spend time with my son. That's all I just want. I love you. You're my son, my only son. I want to spend time. But I would kill off our time together because he got on my nerve.
Right.
So the last 8 years of his life, imagine how close we got because I altered who I was being. I didn't change. I altered who I said I was going to be with my dad. Instead of being upset and frustrated and angry, I was compassionate, acknowledgement, and gratitude.
Right. I feel like when we are younger, we get this tendency that our parents definitely get on our nerves, and as we get older, we start to appreciate them more. Like we actually take the initiative to reach out to them.
Yes.
Because there was a point in my life where my mom and I had a little fallout because she has a husband and she brought him in the house, and then he felt like he could run the whole thing. Yeah, so it's like we was clashing a lot, and then my mom would always take his side, and it's like you really put this man over your own children.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I always looked at that. I'm like, yo, that's wrong. So I would tell my dad about it.
Yeah.
And he would, make suggestions that, when you reach age 16, 17, then you can, choose to live with me or not. Because I guess it was some law. I don't know. I don't remember entirely.
It's a law. It's a law.
Yeah, it's a law. So yeah, like that was definitely a lot. But over the years, like my mom and I, we started like, slowly getting back on good terms. And I'm actually glad that happened, because I feel like if we still weren't on good terms, then I probably wouldn't be treating women the best. I probably wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that would really like destroy me. And to piggyback on what you said about parenting and you know, with parents talking to their children about certain things. I was actually on a show last week, I believe. Big up to No Topic TV. We was talking. I mentioned that parents don't teach certain things to their children. For example, like, you know, getting a girlfriend or getting a boyfriend. Like,
Oh my
parents don't really focus
gosh.
on that. They just want you to get an education, get your degree, and get a
Oh my
good job, make
gosh.
this amount of money. That's it. They don't want to teach you anything about social life. So that's very
Yes.
interesting that you brought that up.
That is, bro, I just learned that from I listened to Dr. Miles Monroe. He was a huge spiritual leader. He has teachings on men and men sex talk, like straight talk with men, from those principles of the Bible principles. Man, I was like, and he starts off one of his conversations with, "What did you learn about sex?" And he's doing this presentation that's recorded, and everybody is saying, from the Friends to movies to magazines to older ladies to all this, and he says, "Do you see what's in common here? None of us learn about sex from our parents."
Right.
And that's where it has to come from. It has to come from, because again, we don't really understand that as a child, as a parent to a child, that child is as you're the number one communication person to that child, the life. You are the parent. You are the number one person in that child's life. And when that wedge happens, because it will happen. It is a empirical truth that there is a break in communication between the child and the father and the child and the mother. It just depends on when, between ages of like 2 to like 12. One between those ages, you will have whether it's a disappointment, whether you think my dad didn't come to my basketball game because he don't care, like, but he had to work. Like, we don't understand, again, at those ages, what it is to be an adult. So we make up a decision because we don't get told, or we don't understand what it is to be an adult. So when that break happens between that child and that dad, that was mine at 5. So no matter what he did, no matter where he took me, no matter what he brought me, the back of my mind also had, "You just doing that because you don't love me. You don't love me." And then when he didn't show up to pick me up, it was, "See, I told you." Yep. See, Farron, my mind. I never opened my mouth. I never said, "Dad, do you love me?" Dad, my dad, like, I never knew how to articulate that at those ages, because the perception of a child is, we don't know.
Right.
So 35 years as an adult, it was worse. But I would go home like mad at myself. Why can't I spend time with this dude? Like, I saw it. Why can't I spend time with this man? Like, I love my dad, but I'm only good and so I just started living like, we only good for like 2 hours, Pop. So we need to hurry up, go hang out, because I don't want to be mad at you. Like, that was a real life. That was my real life, man. So can you imagine my dad? Can you imagine how hurt he was, probably? So when I figured out at 40, I called him. He was like, again, I love you, son. I just want to spend time with my son. That's all he ever wanted. And I didn't offer that because he got on my nerve. So from that moment on, at age 40, Dad, I'm committed to you. Compassion, acknowledgement, gratitude, love, joy. Now, we would still go play pool, and I would bring up a subject, and he would say, "If I was you, I would do it." And I'd be like, "Ah!" My insides be like, "Ah!" But I remembered, "Who did you say you're going to be with your dad?" I said, "Oh yeah, that's right." So I would, "Hey Dad, why would you do life like that?" Thank you for saying that, Pops. I appreciate that, Dad. Thank you, Dad. I love you. Now tell me, why would you do it like that? You see what that did? That furthered him to start to express his view. And sometimes, you know what? He didn't even have nothing. He didn't even have nothing to say. He just cared about his son. He just wanted his son to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to cut him off. Man, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of here. You've never been married. You ain't been in the military. You don't know. You don't know nothing. Shut up. Get out of here, man. Matter of fact, I'm done with you. Let's go. Put the pool balls away. Let's go. I'm done. I'm gonna drop you off at home. 2 weeks, 2 months, sometimes 2 years we didn't talk. And I would call him like nothing. Hey, Dad, how you doing? Hey, son, how you doing, son? I love you. I love you too, Dad. You want to go play some pool? Yeah, son. When? I'm gonna pick you up 12 o'clock. Okay. Like nothing ever happened. I was tired of that, bro.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to look in my life and be like, what is that? And I discovered it.
Wow. I mean, I just feel like from that, I just feel like he just wanted to let you know that he loves you.
Okay,
You know what I'm saying? That's all that mattered.
That's it.
You know what I'm saying?
That's it.
That's what people need to like realize, like, your parent loves you.
Yes.
Just remember that, because one day they're not gonna be here.
Bro, I'm telling you.
So the last thing they want you to know, I love you.
Telling you, man.
And I want to spend time with you. You know what I'm saying?
You know how some parents, I've met friends that be like, my mom always tell me to go put a jacket on. Oh, go grab your coat. Like, dude, that's your mom telling you that she loves you. Like, you have to look underneath all of that. That's coming from a love. Right. Not that she's trying to control you or trying to tell you what to do with your life.
Right.
And so I learned that it's the spirit behind things that are parents. And so when the Bible talks about honoring your father and mother, that you may have long life, like that was a promise in the commandments that he gave us. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you have to, you're not going to like your mother all the time. You're not going to love her all the time, but it's the spirit behind how you talk about them and how you think about them. Mm-hmm. And that's where the healing process comes from. It's the spirit behind what comes out of your mouth. I love my dad, but you get on my nerve. It's the spirit behind it. And I believe that God has allowed me to be a messenger in this conversation, man, because even if you look at statistics, a lot of young men in jail, there's a percentage of them that just wanted the attention from their father. They just wanted attention and they went to go get it somehow. I'm like, you're gonna pay attention to me, whether it's positive or negative, you're gonna pay attention to me. But imagine if we could start to heal that in our generations. Imagine if we start to have these kind of conversations. You don't even have to obey your dad, because your dad might be living a corrupted life. So It's not that you have to obey him what he tells you to do, but it's the spirit behind the love that you don't really understand. That's just that's his expression of love. Mm-hmm. And the mom is the same thing. That's why that promise is so important. It says honor your father and mother, because how you think about them affects your relationship with women, with men, and we know it. We sing it in songs. We label it with all these different terms as descriptions. Daddy issues, mama issues. Like, those are real conversations, but we have to take the label off, and you have to just be able to talk to the person and listen to the person. And the person will tell you out of their mouth exactly what they're dealing with. It will come out of their mouth. If you're listening to what you're listening for, you'll hear it.
Absolutely.
And we don't want to be invalidated. So it's like, how can I, again, we talk about feelings and emotions from men. It's like, how can I be vulnerable? No, I need another word besides vulnerable, because I'm not being vulnerable.
Right.
So what takes courage, it takes confidence, it takes knowing who you are as a person first to be able to even articulate, hey, you know what? And so I had to learn how to articulate my feelings and emotions. We have feelings and emotions, but we don't have to become them. Mm-hmm. And most of the time we think that you make me mad. You do this to me. No, you have a choice on how you react and how you respond, to be loving or angry. The Bible says turn the other cheek. But what's the spirit behind turn your other cheek? Maybe it's taking responsibility. You know what? You mad at me? Well, you probably because I could have said something else. Or maybe I said that on purpose so I could piss you off, knowing that it was gonna piss you off, but I said it anyway. Like then I could be responsible for our interaction because you know what? That was my fault. That was my fault. I shouldn't have said that. So can you forgive me? I apologize. And you know what? You might not say, no, you know what, bro? I'm done with you. I'm done. I don't want to be your friend. I see why you wouldn't want. I wouldn't want to be my friend either if I was like that to people. People like that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different dynamic. It disappears haters. I mean, it's a conversation that disappears all these different things that society has focused on surviving life. And
Right.
I think that is just another, there's another dialogue that needs to take place so we can start to heal ourselves first, man.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm at with it.
Powerful words. Powerful words. People, write this down. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say. Just write it down. You know what I'm saying? But final question before we wrap up.
Okay.
So back to the radio. If you were to give advice to someone that wants to get into radio, what would that advice be?
Oh, first of all, find your voice. Look in your life. We're connected to so many different communities, right? A lot of people live like they're alone. Like you have a gym community, you have a church community, you have your life experiences. A lot of times for me, find something that you can talk about that's natural. When I do my shows, I don't have no script. I don't give questions unless the person wants questions. I'll give them like a few questions to let them know where the conversation is going to go. But find out something that you care about. Look in your life for an experience, and it's usually we're born. If you believe you're born for a reason, a lot of times it's a negative experience that your voice speaks to because there are other people in the world who are going through that same kind of situation, and your story could be the story that they need to hear to help them start to heal from that process. So find out what you're compassionate about, find out what you care about, find your voice, and just go for it. I mean, there's so many podcasts now, platforms now. You and first and second off, honestly, I don't do it for followers. I don't do it for likes. I learned to be the leader of my conversation, right? So it doesn't matter who follows you or who clicks the like button because people are still looking at you. They're still watching you. They may not acknowledge it with a like or comment, but you have to be confident that your voice and on your platform is being heard. And it may not be today. Somebody might listen to that episode 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now, and reach out to you because it touched their life. So I learned being a leader in your conversation and just find your voice. And I have many things that I could talk about. It's not about being a jack of all trade. It's about my life experiences. I can speak to veterans. I can speak to arthritis. I can speak to sickle cell trait. I can speak to mental health issues because those are things in my life that those are my experiences. And people are dealing with those issues in their life, trapped and stuck. Like they're the only ones that's going through this. No, you're not that unique. You're not that special. We're all dealing with it. I can relate to men who live with lupus. I can relate to men who live with leukemia because it's a human experience, not just the label of the chronic illness. Because underneath all that, we're all dealing with some kind of depression, some kind of anxiety. We all want love. We all want life. We all want a family. We all want these things in life. And you live with a chronic illness. So
absolutely
speak to the person.
right.
And a lot of podcasting is ego driven too. So you gotta find
Mm-hmm.
you gotta find your ego. You gotta check your ego at the door because people will be able to notice what's really driving you. Is it really your conversation or is it your ego driven? I got a talk show. I'm a broadcaster. People will be able to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So find your passion. and go to school.
Yes.
Go to school. I went to radio and TV broadcasting academy after I retired from the military.
Mm. See, he had a plan, people.
Yeah, purpose.
Get down with the program. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, it's a huge platform now. I mean, everybody's got a voice, and this is the great thing about today, is the voice, but a lot of it is driven from justification, objectification. We objectify each other so easy. Like I could objectify you right now by your hair, and I don't have hair. And we label people. And that label that we label each other with, it doesn't allow us for that human connection. And that's what we really want underneath it all. We really want that human connection. But we're taught to survive life, don't play with them kind of people. Stay away from that kind of person. But the brain doesn't know the difference between a real and an imaginary threat.
Mm-hmm.
The brain can't tell a difference. It's like when you learn how to drive a car and they taught you, when you see brake lights, put your foot on the brake. When you see the red lights in front of you, put your foot on the brake.
Right.
When you learn how to drive, no matter what you're doing, eating, playing music, and talking, you see brake lights, brake. It becomes a natural part of our subconscious mind. So when something is an imaginary threat and a real threat, the brain can't tell a difference. So then how do you know you're really being threatened or not?
Right. Absolutely.
So those are all the things, man. Like I said, it's just a blessing to be able to look back and sort out my issues, my troubles, articulate it, own it. I own everything. I call girls that I lied to and cheated on and ask for apologies, man. Like when you take responsibility for your life, 100%, you acknowledge it. Because you just never know. One day you might be on the air somewhere and the girl call in and be like, hey, I remember you mother, you blah, 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 blah. And you'd be like, oh, yay, hey. No, bro, take responsibility for the consequences, all of it. Because if you apologize, you acknowledge that and ask for forgiveness, they could never say you didn't apologize. They could never say you made an attempt to ask for forgiveness, even though you did cheat or whatever. Now their conversation will always shift. Well, he's a jerk, but but he did call me though, girl. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did apologize. Changes your whole perspective and how people look at you.
Definitely.
So,
but Mr. Dozier,
man,
definitely a pleasure having you on the show, sir.
You gotta come on you gotta come on my show, man. Whether it's my blog talk show or my weekly show on Tuesday, one or the other. I gotta
let me know.
I gotta get you on. Matter of fact, I'll have you on both. How's that?
Listen,
I'll do a segment. I'll do a segment on my Tuesday show, and I'll do an episode with you on my blog talk show because I like to find out more about who you are, what you care about, and obviously you got a voice in this world as well. So I appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much, sir. That definitely means a lot to me. Tell the people where they can find you on social media.
Real easy. Just go to farrond.com. It will take you to all of my platforms for my radio stuff. My sickle cell trait can get you from that site. But if you want my sickle cell trait, it's wdconsct.org. But farrond.com has everything that will take you to a link to the things that I care about and what I'm up to. And again, it's just an opportunity it's people's lives at stake, man. You see it. This pandemic, man, we haven't even talked about the mental health and the suicides that are taking place in this generation and how we have to be able to teach these skills, foundation skills, because they've already saw George Floyd's death on social media. They've already been through this pandemic and all this political stuff. Can you imagine your children now trying to figure out their life in the future? It's just going to repeat that cycle. But I believe that we can have these kind of conversations to interrupt that and teach our children how to think. We can't teach them what to think, but give them the tools like I got at 40, teach them how to think. Look from your perception, your interpretation, but also be open to listen to other people's view. So we don't spend the rest of our next 40 years debating and arguing and justifying my position in life. And it just takes us further and further apart, while these systems in the world that we point to still controlling everything.
Right.
Like so we can have another conversation about that, but we gotta heal, man.
Definitely.
We gotta heal,
needs
man.
to be touched upon for a fact.
We gotta be able to heal.
Right. But there you have it, people. This is The Millennial View. I am your host, Sprint Ravers, alongside Farron Dozier. Again, like, share, and subscribe. That's people. Right.